We are joined on this episode by the founder and managing director of Silent Assassin Films, an award-winning producer and production designer who not only produced but wrote and directed the Mystery Box episode in the upcoming Shudder original series DEADHOUSE DARK. She is Rachele Wiggins. Rachel, thank you so much for joining us on the program here.
Thank you for having me. I'm really quite thrilled to be on this podcast, considering all the people you've had on before.
We are just as thrilled to have you. And, based on our conversation that we had before we started recording, I am really excited to see how you answer some of our questions later.
It's a little nerve-wracking, but I'm ready. I'm so ready.
Oh, yeah, please. Yeah, everyone is strangely nervous about the fun pop culture-y part of our quiz, but we'll start with the other questions, the easy questions first.
The easy ones.
The proper interview that, questions you probably had plenty of times already in the promotions and whatnot. But before we get to that, we like to usually start off by asking, what was your introduction to film, to filmmaking, specifically genre film? Was there a particular person that influenced you, or a place or a movie or a piece of pop culture that maybe got you hooked?
Well, I was really fortunate to have both of my parents in the film industry. So my dad used to teach film, but he also used to work in film for a long time before he was a teacher. And my mum was in art department, so hence where some of my production design background comes from. So I kind of grew up on sets. I was even a baby in a series. Apparently I wasn't well behaved on set. Somebody said, let's give this baby a Valium to calm them down. But wow. Yeah, I know, right? But no, I grew up on sets, and interestingly enough, not interestingly enough, but and my sister is also a director. Everyone was like, don't go into film, go and be an artist because you've got skills in art. And I was very resistant to it because I just loved being on sets. I grew up with that. And so I was a bit resistant, but I also loved my art. So I went off to art school and really sort of fell in love with sort of playing with mediums, different mediums like photography and whatnot. And then I think I always just would drift back to film. Like my paintings were always an attempt to try and tell a story in a painting. And then they got to a point where I was like, I just got to go give film a try. And I absolutely was influenced by many directors, but one of the people that, especially in my younger years, that was very influential was Ridley Scott, because I love worlds and he is the king of building worlds. Like you've got Alien, you've got, even his, dramas like Thelma and Louise are just, there's such stylized, designed, very clever films. And I'm a massive Blade Runner fan, like, oh my God, so much. And so, yeah, he was a big inspiration for me, definitely, in sci-fis. But I just also particularly like horror. And horror sci-fi is where I'm probably most happy. Give me a horror sci-fi any day, and even if it's bad, I'll still enjoy it.
In my language, I agree.
Yeah. So that's probably how I think I was always in it, if that makes sense. Like felt like I was always at home with filmmaking. But yeah, I didn't finally sort of commit to it until about 7 years ago. Then I was like, right, I'm going to do this. And yeah, I just set off doing it.
So beyond the world building, is there something particular about those genres in question, like sci-fi and horror, that you're particularly drawn to? I think what gave you that bug?
Well, I think particularly with horror, the one thing that I love about horror is you're given the opportunity in everyday life. We are always sort of like not showing people our fears because we don't want to have people sort of judge us or appear to be weak. And so watching a horror, it's like you're giving yourself the license to, okay, I'm going to enter this cinema and I'm going to give myself the license to be scared for an hour or two. And it's okay. And so it becomes this cathartic purge. And I think especially considering some difficulties I had when I was younger, horror was just an escape, because it was always that thing of, oh, well, at least I'm not being chased down by a guy with an axe, and so it puts things into perspective. And yeah, I love horror. What can I say? Who doesn't love a bit of blood?
Yeah, it's like the same appeal as a roller coaster. It's a safe way to be scared, a very contained experience so that you can have that thrill, but know that, you still return to the real world afterwards.
Yeah, exactly. And I think with sci-fi, for me, the thing that I think is amazing about sci-fi is you get to reinvent what the world might look like. And that is so much fun. I mean, and there's so many different ways you can take sci-fi. It can be really subtle. It can be like Primer, or then you get the more complex, completely, VFX or model making of something like Star Wars or Blade Runner, and even Alien. I mean, gosh, how amazing is that? Yeah, I think, So for me, I think being able to invent something new and different is always very attractive as a filmmaker, but also, that ability to escape from reality, which is, I think, very unique to horror and sci-fi.
Totally. When you were describing it, I was thinking about the terms low fantasy and high fantasy, and I feel like they should say low sci-fi and high sci-fi too. I don't know if there's another word for it, but I totally get what you mean. And I'm a big fan of like more low fantasy or low sci-fi. Like that's my jam. Like I love the Black Mirror stuff because it's like, it's just close enough to your reality where you can envision yourself within it.
Well, it's that almost that uncanny valley situation. I think those sci-fis that kind of border on being like almost like you couldn't imagine that technology like now, like you believe that the technology is at that level, and so it becomes unnerving because you're like, whoa, what if you really could duplicate memories and then people could sell my memories, and oh my God, that's terrifying, that's my memory, things like that I find like so fascinating to explore. And I think, you look at Philip K. Dick's stuff and why so many of his books have been turned into movies is, there's a big philosophical component to it, which is fun to explore without it being too like philosophical, if that makes sense. You can explore very simple themes or complex themes, in a very simple way using sci-fi. And I think that's always fun, like time travel.
Exactly. I wanted to go back and talk a little bit more about your experience in fine arts school. And did you see that influencing the way you saw films? Like you talked about how films were kind of creeping into your art and influencing your art, but did it also work the other way around where it sort of changed how you kind of approached either your eventual filmmaking or also just the way you observed cinema?
Definitely. I mean, look, to be honest with you, I still refer to myself as an artist. I'm just working in the medium of film. And I think every different medium that I've used over the years. So I started doing photography when I was like 15, 16. Like I was developing film in mum's bathroom. And, and then I, ended up going into drawing and painting, but I also did etching. And you learn something new with every discipline that then I was absolutely able to utilize, not just as a production designer, but also as a filmmaker, because a lot of it comes down to problem solving. Like making art is about it's about making almost a lie convincing, like often we're doing a portrait to make it look like a person, but it can never actually be 100% that person. So it's how do you do it so that you can trick it so that it feels like that person, but then also have other meanings and concepts that you might be exploring within that work. So it's kind of like the foundation. It's like when you go to art school, they make you draw a lot if you're a painter, and if you're a sculptor, they just make you draw. I feel like a lot of really talented filmmakers often went to art school and really benefited from that foundation, because you learn more than just film. You learn about the history of where everything comes from, and even hearing the director of The Exorcist, William Friedkin, he was talking about all of the influences he got from to make The Exorcist. And so much of it was like music history, it was art history. I mean, he referenced, painters that I was sort of referencing when I was making my films. And it was kind of nice to know that all sometimes unconsciously seeps through into your work and your working process, I think.
Yeah, I can relate to that. I remember my senior thesis film in college, most of my references were Andrew W. Wyeth paintings. And when I would share that with my cinematographer, they're like, oh, I thought you were going to give me a other films. Like, well, I can give you those too. I think that's just what like the language a lot of film students are used to communicating in. But when I look back at the finished film, I feel like it is representative of those Wyeth paintings much more than the films I referenced. It was such a good, like, they just communicated the emotions and the visual color palette that I really wanted in it. And I didn't necessarily think it was as helpful to go, copy other films.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah, I know. And funnily enough, whenever I do a pitch deck, I always do a pitch deck with film references in there, but I always pick an artist that tonally feels like that film. And so it adds a unification that feels a little bit unique because you're referencing something that hasn't actually been that on screen, and I think for the reasons you were just talking about. And you want to try and be different at the end of the day. I think in anything that you do, you want to give audiences something they haven't seen before, or give them something that they have seen before, but do it in a way that feels different. I think you've got to entertain audiences these days, and it is becoming more and more challenging because, you've got these amazing productions like Mandalorian coming out with new technology, and which is great. So sometimes the bar gets set really high, but at the same time, I find you kind of go into that problem solving mode and you're like, okay, how can I do what they did, but on very little budget? Because that's another thing that we have to contend with here in Australia. I mean, it's everywhere, everybody experiences this, but there's not a lot of finance here in Australia. And so, we've really had to be clever in how we get productions done. Like, I'm still very curious to see what budget people think we have had for Deadhouse Dark, because it wasn't a big budget. And a few people have come back going, oh, you must have done that for a couple of mil. And it's like, no, go down further. And it's just getting clever. And I think that's the part of filmmaking I really like, to be honest with you, is okay, you're given a constraint and you're told, okay, make something this, but you've only got this much money and this much time. And I think you get really clever.
Yeah, I always say artists love constraints, because it's like, if otherwise it's like blue ocean, and which can be cool and exciting. Yeah. But, for me, it's like, no, I kind of need some parameters. Yeah. Otherwise, I'm going to go off forever. But like, give me a deadline, I need to hit X, Y, and Z and I'll achieve it. I want to ask a bit more about how you sort of transitioned from your fine arts background into film. I mean, it sounds like you've always kind of been in that world, and the art department was a very natural, extension for you. But how did you end up taking that leap? Like, after you finished school, you said you got into it more recently, 7 years ago. So tell me about that process.
So it was a really interesting thing. So I had decided I wanted to be a filmmaker, and, I wanted to give directing a shot, but I knew that I'd have to sort of probably work my way into directing. And so my avenue in was through production design and art departments. And as fate would have it, one of my dad's ex-students, Shayna Bess, who did Infinity, a low-budget sort of sci-fi shot here in Australia, and they were looking for help. And I was just like, okay, cool, I'll jump in and I'll volunteer. And one minute I was volunteering in production, and the next minute I was in art department. And I gradually just kept getting upgraded because it was low budget and not many people were willing to take on board the challenge. But of course I didn't have any credits, and I was like, yeah, give it to me. Let me, I'll come and make, a sci-fi and build, spaceship stuff. And and I got to work with George Little, who was one of the production designers on Dark City. So I was like in heaven. I just took a bit of leave from work and threw myself into art department, and it was like a baptism of fire in terms of like learning. Like, I was thrown in it big time. And so from that experience, I learned a lot. And then I got off, and then that's when I met Enzo, because he said, oh, look, I'm doing a web series called Elok, and I think we need a production designer, because they were looking at potentially replacing a production designer for some reason. And yeah, I came in, and I was 3 weeks out from shooting, and it was hugely ambitious. And it was like, okay, you have to build 2 sets, and you haven't got much money. Go. And it's like, oh, okay, how do I do this? But luckily for me, I'd just come off doing this intense sci-fi, which was pretty much all studio. And so I had this kind of like, you know, when you kind of roll from one thing to another, and because you're rolling, you kind of don't stop to think about it and worry, you just dive in. And it wasn't until I was in it that I was like, oh, this is challenging. But then I got through it and I had an awesome time. And then from that, it was kind of crazy. I had never production designed in my life. And I went from a feature film where I was working as a runner, went from runner to, you know, props maker to assistant set decorator. And I was doing multiple roles on that. And then the next thing I did was production designed a web series, which won a bunch of awards. And then everyone was ringing me up to do low budget genre work. And I was like, cool, I love genre. And so it kind of happened that way. And I was also producing at the same time as well, because often you come on to do low budget stuff. And what people don't realize with regards to art department is it's one of the only departments where you're given a budget. Like, you're in control of it. They give you the money and you've got to work out the best way to utilize that money and get your team to sort of buy and make the things that you need. And so you, especially when it's low budget, you get really good at actually, you know, hustling and saving. And so I applied those skills to producing and was sort of simultaneously always sort of producing and production designing. And then naturally, I eventually started writing more. And then that was how my producing was my backdoor into directing, because I was like, hey, if I can produce, then I can direct. Because that was always what I wanted to do. It was just finding the way to get there. So, I went the long way, but in some ways it was the short way, because I managed to do it quicker than probably a lot of people did, because that was 7 years ago when I started. And I've done a few feature films since then and a few series. So, yeah, crazy.
And I would say, having done the art department first, when you became a producer, you might have been the producer who knows exactly what kind of money art department truly needs. So it might have helped out both ways.
Yeah, it did. And you know what was also great about it was knowing, like, some people would go, oh my God, this is going to cost a lot. And I'd be like, no, you do this. And they go, oh, that's really clever, because you've learnt little tricks and cheats that you can do to make something work in camera, rather than go and have to do this big VFX shot, which would take like heaps of time to rotor or something. And also the other benefit of art department is you're one of the first people brought on. So you get to work with everybody. And then the producing component was, you know, I really got to sort of learn the back end, the post-production side of things. So I kind of got the best of both worlds happening at the same time. I learned the pre-production skills as well as the post-production skills. And so that just, I think, helps everything, because you've then got an understanding of how something starts and then finishes. And that served me well, definitely, you know, in getting some of the projects that I got. And it certainly served me well in terms of DEADHOUSE DARK. You know, I got, because it was a really tight budget, and we were really ambitious because we had 6 directors with completely different looks. And we shot a feature length worth of footage in 2.5 weeks, you know, which is kind of crazy. You know, each director got 2 days, except for Josh. He got 3 days because he was in Queensland, and that was structured a little bit differently. So, but yeah, hopefully that answered your question. I didn't segue too much.
No, it did. And we'll get to DEADHOUSE in just a moment, actually. So you kind of segued into being a producer as well, even, you know, with the Trial by Fire with the art department. But as a producer, how did you mentioned money can be tight like it is with any independent, whether it's the States or Australia. How did you get the early projects off the ground as far as like the shorts and the YouTube things you did? Was it through grants? Was it through anything in particular? Was there a unique way you financed them?
Yeah, well, the first ever production I ever really did was a short film, and I was production designer and producer on that. I actually fell into the producing by accident, really. It was one of those things where it's like nobody was sort of really officially producing. And as the designer, I kind of needed the locations to be sorted. So I just started producing. And so probably on those first couple, you know, in some ways, I probably invested a little bit of my own money mixed with the filmmakers that I was working with. But as things went along, some of it was funding bodies, some of it was sweet talking people into trusting us with their money, or simply saying to them, look, we won't be able to give you your money back, but you want to support some up and coming filmmakers, and if you do, we'll come back and give you the projects that really are worth backing. I mean, we were very fortunate with Deadhouse Dark that we did get some additional private finance, and that was very much because that person who I'd been talking to for a number of years had been seeing the projects I was doing, and every time I said I was going to do something, I would do it, and we would achieve the goal, whether it be getting into a festival or getting it onto a platform. And his attitude was, well, I just want to support you guys as filmmakers because I can see where you're going. And if you keep doing what you're saying you're doing, then the next thing you do will be really big, won't it? And I was like, that's the plan. So yeah, I think some of it is also just being, I say luck, but I also know that part of luck is also just, I think, having people trusting you. And that comes down to sort of, I think, probably being really honest. My honesty probably got me far. Saying to somebody, look, I really need a favor and just know that I can't pay for this right now, but I'll come back to you with something I can. I think a lot of people do that, in the early days is, you get free favors and then you just repay them back later, which is really, really important to repay the favors.
Yeah, absolutely.
Trying to think if there's any other way, but no, to be honest with you, a lot of it's just been us finding ways around problem solving with very little money. So yeah.
Yeah, I think that's the case. Different parts of the world are better at the whole grants and government funding for the arts thing. The US isn't particularly great at that, but it almost always comes down to, being scrappy and problem solving, like you said, no matter where you are in the world or what budget you have. I wanted to talk about Deadhouse Films a little bit before we talk about Deadhouse Dark. Yeah. So was Deadhouse Films created before Deadhouse Dark, or was it created at the same time, or like as an LLC as a result of Deadhouse Dark?
No, it was definitely created beforehand. And it's one of those things where we were all having a really difficult time with finding ways to make genre in Australia, because that's the other thing is not many people do genre here because we don't often have funding bodies support genre films because, it's considered expensive. You say a sci-fi and often funding bodies assume it's going to be really expensive. They don't always factor in those sort of sci-fis we were talking about earlier that are kind of minimal, a sci-fi, I think is the best word, minimal. So I think Enzo kind of came up with this idea of Deadhouse as kind of like a bit of a tongue-in-cheek commentary on the state of things for us. It's like, because a dead house used to be where they would take bodies, to like basically store during, I think, wartime or something. But he'll tell the story better than me. But no, it came first. And essentially what happened was how I got involved with Deadhouse was I had been working with Enzo for a number of years, and he applied for an enterprise grant to Screen Australia. And essentially it allows you to hire somebody to come and work for a business that's emerging for 2 years, and they help finance that. So it's a way to support the business building up, but it's also a way to support up and coming talent and for somebody to learn. So it was really, really fortuitous that happened. It was right when I was getting to that point where production design, it's not that I didn't love it, but I was only getting offered the low budget jobs, and I really wanted to do bigger budgets where I could make big sets. And if I couldn't do that, I was like, okay, let's move on to producing and directing. And that was when Enzo was like, hey, do you want to come work at Deadhouse? And it all just worked out. And so for 2 years, we conspired to make a number of projects, and Deadhouse Dark was one of them. In the second year of that grant, that was when we sort of went, let's just do something really great that feels a bit different. And that was what came out of that conversation, was Deadhouse Dark.
So you kind of already answered this a little bit, but so is that the whole mission of Deadhouse, was specifically to kind of an avenue for genre films, which are harder to get funding in Australia. Was that really like the sole focus and mission, or was there more to it than that?
Oh, I think there was a little bit more to it than that. It was about finding a place where people could showcase genre films that had already been made as well, because the idea was to create a platform, a streaming platform, much like Shudder, because Shudder wasn't in Australia at the time when we sort of were talking about this. It hadn't come here. So Enzo had this idea of let's make a streaming platform. So Enzo started building that platform, and it was about finding content and finding people who, once they had finished their festival run, had somewhere to showcase the film here in Australia, because often genre films don't necessarily get theatrical release. It's usually dramas or comedies or very Australian films, or like obviously Australian films, like things with landscapes and things. But the amount of people we kept bumping into that had a feature film and they're like, oh yeah, it's been released everywhere in the world, but not here in Australia, which is kind of sounds crazy. You kind of go, well, how does that not happen? Or they would give up and release it on YouTube, or in some cases, it would go to a distributor who would focus mainly on the overseas component, but not here. And so, yeah, it was about sort of finding a place to go, okay, well, here's where sci-fi should exist, and where horror should exist, and thrillers and that stuff that maybe wasn't getting as much focus, I guess.
So I'm just curious, based on what you said, is Australia, I don't know what the system is there, but like, is there evidence that just genre doesn't do well? Or is it more, has anything broken through in the last few years that kind of disproves that notion that maybe horror or sci-fi will break through if it's got a wide release?
I think that, look, there's definitely a demand for it, and more now because of Netflix and some of these streaming bodies that are very interested in seeing content from other areas and in a lot of non-English speaking areas too. But I think, so basically many years ago we had what was called the 10BA, and that was the heyday of where we had like Mad Max and, Picnic at Hanging Rock and a lot of really classic Australian new wave cinema. And it was because we had such a good producer offset, like the incentives there for investors was so great. And then at a certain point, the decision was made to cut that back, and they cut it back very dramatically. And from that point, a lot of genre filmmakers, but just filmmakers in general, really struggled to find finance, because we don't have a huge population here. So, if you're finding finance, you usually can't get big budgets. And then of course, if something's not a big budget, it then, it's hard to pull a named actor, and so it becomes really, really challenging. And I think we're starting to claw back now because, mainly because filmmakers are forcing the issue, but also for the first time, they're actually re-looking at the producer offset, and they have actually made some changes, some of it for the better, some of it not. Interestingly enough, they changed the producer offset for feature films from 40 to 30%. So that actually went down, but for TV series, it went up. So there's been a lot of debate going on about that right now. A lot of people arguing to go back to the 40 because there were a lot of people that were building their businesses on this model of the 40% rebate and getting, investment, on board on that basis. And so, there's massive debates. Like this happened right during the pandemic, this discussion, and it's being implemented as of the end of June, which is having big implications. It actually had implications on a feature film I was trying to do this year. We were trying to shoot before the changeover, and we realized we can't do that, so we're shooting later in the year. But it is kind of interesting to sort of see how it's affected the industry. I mean, it's just harder. I think people who survive here in Australia survive because they're relentless. Like you got to have tough skin, in Australia to try and make it because there's not many people, there's a lot of people vying for not much money.
I would say outside of 2 to 3 cities here, it's no different. Becky can tell you.
I was going to say.
Even in cities that you think, like she was nearby Vancouver for several years, but a lot of that's unionized. You have to be Canadian crews, like it wasn't easy for her to just go up north and 50 miles and shoot. It's outside of LA and New York, to be honest, it's even on those cities, it's difficult because I'm in LA. I'm one of a million people trying to do the same thing. But if we had Jill Gavargazian last week. She's from Kansas City. Same thing, just mid-sized city, a lot of commercial work. You got to really grind forever just to get, the few features that might come around town. But Sydney does seem to get a lot of big stuff though.
Oh, don't get me wrong. They absolutely do. But a lot of it is international productions or,
and they bring a crew. Yeah.
Yeah. And so it's I think what I should add is even the experienced filmmakers usually can't finance solely on their own. They usually have to get some international money because of just the fact that, when we release theatrically, we don't have the same number of people. So, and the funding bodies are very big on supporting films that will do well at the theaters. So if you want to do a sci-fi, it's a lot more expensive, especially if you want to do one with big sets. Can you will a Screen Australia fund you if you can't get a good theatrical in Australia? Yes, they will if they know you've got international theatrical release, but it becomes hard when you get into that grey area of films that are like over 3 million. But, under 10 million, like those movies really suffer. Like you see a lot of the low budgets or you see the big budgets, not much in between. But I think that is actually starting to happen everywhere now.
I was going to say, that's not a unique problem to Australia, unfortunately.
Yeah. It's like almost, anything under 1 million in some ways. It's like you got to hit this like sweet spot.
Yeah.
But then it's also like you can't get a named actor if you're under that. But then, like you said, it's hard to get a name actor without secure. Like you need it to get the financing, but then they'll be like, "Oh, we don't want to get attached until you have X% of financing in place." And you're like, "But I need you to get the financing."
It's constantly a catch-22. Like you get one thing, and then they're like, "No, but you need the other thing." So you get the other thing, but you lose that thing that you started with because you got. It's so funny. Like I know, it definitely is happening. Like it happens everywhere. But I think we feel it. I think we feel like we feel it more because we just don't have the population sometimes to help support. When you've got like audiences that come out in droves to support you, that's when you can argue your case. But because we don't have as many horror fans or genre fans as maybe the States do, that's where it becomes harder. But thankfully, that's, more and more, I think people are returning back to good old-fashioned sci-fi and horror, which is done really well, actually. And there seems to be a lot of demand for it, which is really nice to see because I love my horror.
Right. Well, speaking of, you've mentioned Deadhouse Films and how you've gotten now to, let's talk about Deadhouse Dark, the anthology that will release on Shudder April 29th. You'd mentioned the kind of origin of Deadhouse being you wanted to be a Shudder for your region, which wasn't there at the time. But can you tell us just kind of how the project itself of Deadhouse Dark came about?
So Enzo had always wanted to do an anthology. Like he'd already done an anthology feature, which was he shot an interconnected piece that linked the short films that had been selected. But he wanted to actually start from the beginning and actually do the shorts and make them episodic and have them have a link piece. So we just started talking about that. And then we just started looking at filmmakers and going, okay, who really loves horror and who would be, keen to give this a shot. And also factoring in that we wanted to try and support emerging filmmakers too, because there's so much support already there for the people that we know are successful at what they do. So it was about going, okay, what do we want to give to somebody else that we've wanted ourselves? So we went about having a look at a number of different filmmakers and whittled it down to, a select few, and then started having conversations about the stories. And then naturally a theme started to form, which was about social media trends and the dangers of online content and interactions. And that became sort of like an inspiration that we then ran with, like an idea that we ran with. And it just kind of fell together very naturally. And so that's really how it started. It was just wanting to support emerging talent in the horror space, and also very much wanted to try and achieve a little bit like what Black Mirror was doing, but more horror and probably less sci-fi. So yeah, that was that. And also Creepshow was a big influence for Enzo. I know he's always loved Creepshow, and so have I. And I grew up watching that stuff, and you go back to what you know and what you love, and you want to kind of recreate it new. So that's exactly what we sort of did.
That's awesome. And you're making your directorial debut with Mystery Box, which is awesome. And especially since it sounds like that was your North Star the whole time throughout your filmmaking journey. So tell us about your experience kind of stepping into that role for the first time. Did you ever find yourself kind of slipping back into producer and production designer mode?
So I had done one little thing before I did DEADHOUSE DARK, which was more of a little mood piece. And I did it with the same actress, where, I had this idea for a story, and I was like, rather than, just write a script, I thought, let's go have a play. Let's get into character. Let's go shoot some stuff. I had a vague idea of a scene, almost like a music video clip in mind. And so we went and shot that in, did 3 hours one day, 3 hours another day. And through that process, I did a lot of experimenting with Lauren as an actress and building trust. And that was very helpful moving into the directing side of things, because we already had a very, very close shorthand, because we were talking about what that show could be, like the feature could be for that idea. And yeah, so the directing side wasn't too daunting for me, because I'd always been working with actors and models for art purposes. Like I was always working on, whenever I did paintings, I would work with actors often and take photographs of them, and we'd role play while I took photographs, and then I'd go and do paintings, and I'd create these stories in my mind. And so that side of it wasn't too difficult, or it didn't feel different, I guess, is probably what I'm trying to say. But the producing side, part of it was there in the back of my mind, but I think what made that process a lot easier in terms of not slipping into producer mode was the fact that both me and Enzo were producing together. We both were directing an episode, and we both were producing. So we knew that when it was time to direct, it was like, okay, I got your back. You direct. Nobody comes up to you about producing questions. You are protected. And so I did that for him, and then he did that for me. And it worked really well, because you're not worrying. You're not thinking, oh God, is the caterer there? Or, are we going to go into overtime because it's not your job to do it on that day, which was just awesome. Even though I did try, and I was unfortunately stuck with a location where I couldn't go into overtime, and I was the only one that couldn't go into overtime. And even though I knew as a producer that I couldn't get overtime, I still went up to Enzo and was like, can I have some overtime? And he's like, no, you really can't. And I'm like, I'm going to beg one more time, because, isn't that what a director does? And he's like laughing at me going, you ain't going to get more time. But thankfully we actually did get every shot. So it ended up being okay. But yeah, no, it was actually quite, to be honest with you, it was like producing and then being able to have a holiday for 2 days during the producing experience, because you just got to, in my eyes, it's not to diminish the directing component. That still requires a lot of work, but most of the work that I was doing was before I got on set. So I just made sure I had my shots drawn out, and I knew it so well that and I had my boards in front of me, and I was showing everybody exactly what I wanted, so that it was easy and fun when I got on set, to be honest with you. I was like, yay, I don't have to worry about the money, which was great.
Yeah, being well prepared is a big part of it. But I think also just your experience being a producer that has had to work on a lot of indie productions probably gave you like so many different qualities that made it easier to step in the directing role. I think a lot of people struggle who haven't had to be the person that people are going to with like all the random questions and problems. Like you've already been in that role as a producer, so you're familiar with it. But I'm glad. It sounds like it was a fun experience.
It was. And to be honest with you, I think the hardest role I've ever done, if I'm really, really honest, is art department. Like working as a production designer, especially on low budgets, because you don't get to have a full crew. You're the person who is making the things. You're the first person to rock up. You're the last person to leave, and it's so physically demanding on you. And also quite stressful, because if a prop breaks or goes missing, you've got to problem solve it and very, very quickly, and make sure that your director's happy and that your producer isn't, getting cross with you. And, I think that actually is in many ways the most stressful role I've ever done. And I've done quite a few roles. And it's funny, I've had a few other people come from other departments and work in art department and later have said, never again. I had a makeup friend of mine who's what actually was in the trivia quiz with me. She worked in art department one time with me when she was like, oh, I haven't got any work. And I was like, oh, I need somebody who can do art department and can also have some prosthetic skills. And she was like, I'll do it. And then by the end of it, she was like, ooh, never again.
Yeah, you can weed out lazy folk in that department quicker than any spot. Not that it's not all taxing, somehow demanding on your body, but there's a physical labor component, I think, with art department people underestimate.
Oh, definitely. And the other thing is the logistics of it. If you have one location that's in a house at nighttime, and then you've got another location that's 2 hours away, but there's only you and one other person, you've got to work out how to pack up that set and then be on that set. And it becomes this logistical, oh my God, how do I do this? How do I be in two places at once? So yeah, it's like boot camp. I always lose weight whenever I'm in art department. Let's put it that way. No more gym.
No sleep, lifting heavy things, lifting flats, moving a million props in and out of trucks. Yeah.
Yes. I feel like you've definitely been in art department before. You know what I'm talking about.
I think Sean and I have said we've done just about, between the two of us, at least every position on set. I find being assistant camera super stressful, especially back then when you're shooting on film.
Yeah. Because
I was always terrified I was going to flash the film. And just like people are like waiting on you to load film.
Yeah, that is terrifying.
Oh, it's so stressful. It was always like, and you have your hands in the tent and they're like, come on, we need it. We need the other mag. And you're like, I'm working on it. I just don't want to ruin the film. And I had one time where the film unspooled on me in the tent. And
oh my gosh.
That was a nightmare. I swear I have like terrible.
People under 20 are like, what are you talking about right now? They don't even know that's a thing that used to happen.
Yeah. There's a lot of complications now. I've never really had to do a lot of AC work on like more modern digital productions. So I don't really, there's a whole nother set of like, now you have to like go download onto the hard drive.
Oh,
yeah, right.
And all that, which
that would
also
I would not want to have the responsibility. DIT, like if you screw that up, you are like, so many people will not like you.
No,
I would never do that role just quietly.
Yeah, it's like if you have to reshoot something because you screw it up. Oh my God.
That actually happened on Airlock. We don't know what happened. Well, we have suspicions, but it's that thing of, sometimes things happen, miscommunications happen, and we did lose like a whole bunch of footage, and that was a whole problem solve for that series. And we got around it, but it was, that was hard. That was hard to know that you've lost all that stuff, and that person felt definitely very bad, I think.
Oh, yeah. I'm sure they still have nightmares about it, just like I do with unspooling film. So I wanted to ask a little bit about, speaking of difficult, nightmarish topics, the pandemic and how that affected DEADHOUSE Dark. Were you shooting before the pandemic? And then kind of how did that roll into the rest of your whole experience with the film and festivals later on?
We actually were all wrapped up and we were done. We had everything ready to go. What it actually affected was the festival circuit. And it was a really hard time because obviously we were excited to have this series selected because it was selected for Cannes series, which is huge. It's like to be in Cannes is amazing, and it's such a prestigious festival. I mean, it's a brand new one as well. It was its third year, and the networking opportunities plus the kudos of being revered by, I think, the French is always such a nice thing, because it's that you feel a little bit like you're legit then. But no, it was really difficult because a lot of us had booked our flights, and I actually had left early because I was going to visit filmmakers in Croatia to talk about another project. And then I was going to fly from Croatia into Paris and then go to Cannes. And then from there, I was going to go to LA. So I had a massive trip booked. And then suddenly the news started coming through, and it was like, okay, you can't leave Croatia to get into the US now. And then it was like, oh no, you can't even get into Europe. And then it was like, oh, now you need to get back home before everything locks down. Yes. And it was so stressful because I actually had the day my plane out of Croatia back home was scheduled, they were going to shut down the airport that day. So I had to book another flight on top of already booking an additional flight. I had all these, like, it was a big trip. Like I had been working towards this opportunity of not just going to the festival, but also networking with people in Paris and then LA for the next few projects I wanted to do. So for me, it was like, oh no, I lost a lot of money and the stress of having to get back. And I just made it home before they started to force people to go into quarantine where you have to pay for your hotel and stuff, which a lot of people got hit financially very hard with that. So luckily I got to quarantine in my own place for 2 weeks. But I just remember getting back and being like, okay, I spent a lot of money. Nobody wants to refund any tickets. I had this big plan, and it was like, it just totally didn't backfire. And I just started the business, Silent Assassin Films. And so I was in that process of going, okay, don't panic. You've made films before, problem solve this. But it was just, and then it just kept getting worse around the world. And so I did have that moment of being in quarantine where I kind of, I mourned the fact that we lost opportunities, but I was also really like mourning for my friends, for myself, in terms of how were we going to survive moving forward? And not just with film, but everything. I mean, we all went through the same thing. And unfortunately for me as well, I had, well, for my family, my father was sick with cancer. And so I was sort of dealing with that component at the same time. And he passed away towards the end of last year. So it was like last year was really, I think for everyone, just heavy. But then the flip side of that was, in that process of mourning and going, how can I problem solve? I actually did start to have a lot of conversations with people around the world. And subsequently, the feature I'm shooting this year, which is really big for me, and I'd love to talk about it, but I can't just yet, came out of it. So it was like the worst and the best year of my life in some ways, because there were a lot of opportunities, but then there were a lot of things that got taken away. And I think if anything, it just sort of reminded me of why I was doing film, I guess. Why am I going to stick this out and not change my mind? And, because at one point I was going, no money's coming in. What job am I going to take? And I kind of just decided, no, I'm not going to take any other jobs. I'm going to back myself and throw myself into development and do what filmmakers do best. And that is make a bad thing work for you. Like turn it into something that actually works and makes things better. I think that's how I always try and approach filmmaking. I don't know about you guys, but often filmmaking is problem solving constantly. So yeah, that was how the pandemic affected me. But yeah, I'm not sure if did that answer your question?
No, certainly.
Answered it in spades. That's really amazing to hear, the positive aspect about how you were able to turn it around, fully commit to development. And, as a result, you ended up with kind of this international project, it sounds like, which I can't wait to hear more about when you're able to talk about. But
it's actually going to be in Australia. It's one of it is an international. It's internationally recognized. That's as much of it as I'll give you. And so I'm really excited.
Yeah. Well, we'll keep an eye out for whatever a press release comes out about it.
Yeah, I just want to be able to talk about it, to be honest with you, because it's like when you're that. I mean, you know what it's like when some piece of good news happens, like you get into a top festival or you get some finance, but you can't say anything until it's official. And I've been sitting on this since like August last year, because it was originally supposed to happen sooner, but for various reasons, we took a bit more time sort of developing the script and sort of reworking. And so now I'm like itching because I kind of know what the dates are now. And I'm like, want to be able to tell people.
Well, soon.
Definitely.
Yeah, should we jump into the rapid fire, Sean?
Yeah, I think we're
rapid fire sounds scary.
I always say.
Becky's regretted naming that ever. It's neither rapid nor putting your feet to the fire. It's answering some questions about yourself and some of your tastes and what we've learned about you so far. We tried to tailor it to you in a James Lipton Inside the Actor Studio vibe, if you guys are familiar with that. On the other side of the world.
Love it. What would you say at the pearly gates?
Yeah. What is your favorite swear word? It's in that vein, but kind of genre bent. I'll start us off. Don't think too hard about it. Just first thing that comes to mind. There's no score. It's just so the listeners can get to know you a little better.
Okay.
First off, what movie do you think you've seen the most in your life?
Oh, that's a tough one. It's a toss up between Blade Runner, Apocalypse Now, and Alien. And I genuinely don't know which one. Or actually, Aliens. I think it's Aliens, actually, because I watched that so many times as a kid. I just couldn't get enough of it. Aliens.
Hold on. She said Alien, but then she said Aliens twice. I want to make sure.
Well, because I watched them both a lot. But then when I think about it, I definitely watched Aliens more than Alien because I want to make sure. Yeah. Well, you kind of watch one and then you want to watch the other.
No, granted. And they're both great in different ways, but equally amazing in my opinion.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, Aliens.
I was going to ask if you have a favorite cut of both Blade Runner and Aliens, like the theatrical director's cut. This is a controversy.
Cut all the way.
All right.
I mean, more is more. But also, like, it's not that I dislike the voiceover, but I just think that the mystique and the haunting quality of Ridley Scott's intended version is just worlds apart. It's just so good. And I like it when you don't always give the audience a complete answer, because then you start to debate it. Like, I love movies where I walk out and I turn to my friend and we start having a debate. Oh, what did that mean to you? And it's like, no, and then this, and then, 3 hours later, you've had a few beers at the pub and you're like, you're talking about you're doing De Niro impersonations or something. Because you're that excited about it. So that's kind of definitely director's cut. And was there another question you asked?
I mean, I have like 5 follow-ups now. No, not about. We'll have a different conversation about Blade Runner on another show.
Yeah, I'll move on to the next question. What is your favorite horror movie franchise?
Oh, franchise. Oh, I think it's just has to be honest with you, like it has to be, or is it Alien? Because this is the thing.
I'll allow it because you could argue.
The later ones weren't always as satisfying. And, I even worked on Alien Covenant and it's hard when you work on a franchise that you've always wanted to work on and you're like, I'm not sure I would have done it that way, Ridley.
Folks won't see this, but Becky did a comedic, look at the camera mouth drop.
I didn't know you worked on Covenant. That's so cool.
Oh, yeah. No, sorry, because I just assumed you knew because of the researching, but no, I've even got the jacket with the emblem on it because, if you worked on it for 6 months or more, you got the crew jacket, which people were really envious of. They were like, just show off your Alien Covenant jacket.
You have some type of Wayland Yutani logo insignia on it?
Yeah. I'm trying to wear. I actually don't know where it is.
It's an audio podcast. You don't need to show.
I would wear it all the time.
Any opportunity opportunity to show off, definitely. I love that stuff. Merchandise and props. I've still got props left over. I've actually got an axe from the Alien Covenant production.
Cool.
A few things, art department stuff that I've sort of kept.
The short answer to your answer is we will allow it because while they're all multi-genre, sci-fi, action, horror, there's enough horror in it that you could say.
I was going to say to you, it would have been, but I actually think that my favorite, if I'm really honest, I love zombie movies. Anything with survival movie or zombie movies, I love. So, George A. Romero's work is just awesome.
Is of the Dead franchise.
Yeah, and it was of the time for me. I think it's that stuff where you got to see blood and guts and heads exploding, and so I was a big fan of that. I'm probably saying more, but I also quite like Saw, because who doesn't like Saw? Who doesn't like the fact? I mean, Aussies, man, and I thought it was a great franchise in terms of an idea. I just thought it was awesome.
Yeah, I feel like you may have answered this more than once already, but we always ask, what's your favorite horror movie subgenre?
I kind of got a bit of a mix, but that's a tough one.
I assumed you were going to say sci-fi horror because you mentioned it a few times.
Well, definitely, but I was also thinking of I really like thriller horror, ones or psychological thriller horrors, things that are more, because with horror there's so many types of horror. There's the gore horror, and then there's the stuff that's a bit more like Rosemary's Baby or The Shining, where it's scary but it's more psychological. I mean, there's ones that are even better examples than that, like Mother, stuff where it's a little bit ambiguous or abstract. I actually would say, in terms of subgenre, maybe more the horror art house, a subgenre, I guess. Yes. But sci-fi is definitely one. But
A24, A24.
Yeah, A24. Love that. Yes, anything by A24 is always really great, like Hereditary, and the list goes on. There's so many. But yeah, I just like stuff that isn't necessarily easily explained. The weird stuff.
What is your favorite installment of George Miller's Mad Max franchise?
The original. You can't get past the original, toe cutter, the classic lines, Big Bopper. One of the things that my brothers used to always say, and his mates were always like, what would Max do? And as you can see, Mad Max in the background, the original. I redid the poster so it said Mad Maxine. It's actually not Mad Max. I drew that with charcoal one day just for fun, because I like the idea of a version of a female Mad Max. And then sure enough, George Miller went and did Furiosa, which I was like, he's so much boring.
Now he's doing a prequel to that. So yeah, there's only, I would argue there's only one maybe wrong answer to that franchise, because if you said Thunderdome, I'd have questions, but any of the other three, I could see an easy, oh yeah, that makes sense.
I must admit, I do still like Thunderdome.
Oh, I like it. I just don't. It's Godfather 3. You can't say it's your favorite.
No. I think Tina Turner may become close to sort of forgiving. Not forgiving. That sounds so bad. Forgive me, George. No, 3 just 1 and 2 were just so epic. And also, the thing that I like about 1 and 2 was you were really on the road, and that's the thing that I love most about a lot of Aussie horrors, like your Wolf Creeks, your road games, like when you actually get to experience horror within a landscape that's vast and empty. I mean, you guys have places in America where it's like endless roads, and it's you don't want to break down on a road where there aren't many cars. That's scary. And I love that, and also just cars driving fast.
A lot of horror is claustrophobic based, but you're right. A lot of it's like the great wide open. We have a whole middle where there's nobody, just like you guys do.
Yeah, and also we've got a lot of deadly snakes and spiders. So
we have that section too. It's called Florida. Florida is our Australia, full of all the poisonous critters.
Yeah, totally.
All right. Speaking of Australian directors, what is your least favorite Baz Luhrmann movie?
Oh wow. That's
it might not be fair. You might be a fan of this.
Kind of a mean question.
No. I feel a little bit mean saying this, but yeah, I wasn't a fan of Australia. I'm sorry, Baz. but I just wasn't.
The very movie about the landscapes you were talking about.
I know, but come on. I think the moment that Hugh Jackman tipped over the bucket over his head in that, stance that just felt, I don't know. I was like, is it supposed to be a comedy? Oh no, that sounds terrible. I shouldn't say that. But
no, even his biggest fans can admit he's got some directing quirks that are.
Oh, look, you've got to look. I'll say this about it. You've got to admire the fact that he does really try to do stuff that's different. And
I like some of his movies, for the record. I wasn't using this question to shit on him so much. It's just the turn of we usually say, what's your favorite Spielberg or Hitchcock? I was like, what's your least favorite Baz Luhrmann? Because everybody seems to have one. I thought you'd say Moulin Rouge, because a lot of people, that's a pretty polarizing movie too.
I quite like Moulin Rouge. I think probably because there was some great songs in there and there was some awesome choreography. And, and I was really fortunate to actually work with Ewan McGregor on Star Wars. And so I think I went back and rewatched, Moulin Rouge because I'd met him and I was, starstruck at the time because I was like 16 and I was like, oh my God, Star Wars, who gets to work on a George Lucas film and an Alien film? I was so lucky. Like, that was awesome. And I got invited back to George Lucas's house because this is an interesting story. So I was on set. My sister had been dating the first AD, James McTee, who went on to do V for Vendetta. So amazing. I know. I was like, wow, that's so cool, James. But yeah, no, I was like just hanging out, like trying not to sort of like be the annoying like fan person, but just like looking at all the sets and just being overwhelmed by everything and so excited. And then there was a girl there that was roughly my age and I just started talking to her and I had no idea when she said, hey, do you want to come back to mine and, we can, watch a movie, that it was George Lucas's daughter. And then before I knew it, I'm back in George Lucas's house watching Run, Lola, Run. I remember this so clearly. And George Lucas walks in and I'm like I'd seen him on set, but it's different when it's in that private environment. And, he's like, oh, this is a good little German film. And all I could think was, you shot American Graffiti and Star Wars. And, oh, hi. I'm eating my rhubarb crumble with my new friend. And it was so surreal and so great. And my dad was like, do you want me to pick you up? I can come to the door. Because my dad's obviously a huge fan, having been a teacher. And so it was funny. But that was my big George Lucas story.
No, it's not bad.
Not many people have a George Lucas story, big or small. So, and also now I really want a rhubarb crumble. I love rhubarb. Oh my gosh.
I just always vividly remember that because I remember I wanted to say more, but I just kept playing with my rhubarb crumble instead because I was like, don't speak too much. Don't do I make eye contact? Do I not?
Yeah. It's like being at a party when you have the drink in your hand so that you can randomly sip it when there's breaks in the conversation. Because you don't know what to do with yourself. All right. Exactly. Next question. As someone who produced an award-winning Blade Runner-inspired short film, and we know that Blade Runner is one of your favorites, what is your favorite film by Ridley Scott's brother, Tony Scott?
Oh, Tony Scott is awesome. Oh, so many. I think the first one that comes to mind, because there's so many I love, but the first one that came to mind was Man on Fire, but I also really like Last Boy Scout. Both of those movies are awesome, but Man on Fire, Denzel Washington, he is so badass in that film. I just love it. And, and I mean, gosh, I really feel like the world really lost something special with Tony Scott going, but he's got so many great films. They never, ever get boring. If his film comes on screen, I'm always like, oh, I'll just watch 10 minutes, but I always end up watching the whole thing.
Yeah. I've had arguments about him and his brother. I think he might be more consistent. His filmography is more consistent. Maybe Ridley's had higher highs and lower lows, but I always go back to Ridley could make every movie Tony made, but Tony could not make Blade Runner and Alien. Well, Ridley just a little bit. Above him. But Tony has some great movies for sure. His post Man on Fire, where suddenly everything was Paul Greengrassy, was not as much for me. But he has some great action movies.
But there's still some good ones in there too.
Oh yeah, for sure.
But yeah, it's interesting. Man on Fire has been coming up a lot recently. Like, I feel like it's having a moment.
A lot of people didn't see it.
It's on life on like TNT over here in the States or something, like on a syndicated cable network.
Yeah, and I was reading something, I can't remember now which actress it was, but I just read that like she was inspired to become an actress after watching Man on Fire with Denzel and is it Dakota Fanning?
Yes.
Yeah, as after seeing their performances, and now it's some famous actress, but I can't remember who it is. But I was like, really, Man on Fire?
Radha Mitchell?
Oh, it might have been.
Yeah, because Radha's Australian. That was one of her, I think it was probably one of those early ones that she did where she was starting to get really popular. But yeah, no, I'm curious, what's your favorite Tony Scott? I mean, Top Gun's pretty awesome, by the way. I do like Top Gun. I don't care what anybody else says. It's hard, isn't it? Because you forget all of them, and you kind of, because there's so many.
Yeah, and his filmography is pretty vast, actually. I do love Man on Fire, and I do love Top Gun a lot. So those are two of like the first movies I think of. True Romance.
I was going to say, if I'm being honest, it's the Tarantino adaptation he did.
True Romance was.
Yeah, I really think that is my if I'm just favorite film that he's directed. It's got.
I think I actually always overlook that because it's got that Quentin Tarantino stamp on it that sometimes you overlook it because you know it's Tony Scott, but I just automatically always think of Quentin's work on that. It's just like, great script and great performances. Patricia Arquette is just incredible. Yeah.
Just so many iconic moments in that movie. I love it.
This is a weird fun fact about me. I have 3 different friends who named their dogs Alabama because of that movie and that character.
Oh, really?
Over the last 20-something years. Yeah, that's a true story.
I was going to say, I know a lot of people who have named their cats after Ripley.
Oh.
Which
I would name my cat Jones.
I was going to say, Jones from the Aliens.
Jonesy.
Well, you would have thought that, but so many people I know who have named like their cat have actually named it Ripley, not Jonesy, which I thought was really interesting. Like quite a few of my friends, just sort of, it was funny. I had like about 3 friends within the space of a couple of months go, yeah, I've got a cat called Ripley. And I'm like,
And that name has really been like the go-to badass female name for 3 decades now.
It is my daughter's middle name. I don't know if you know that, Sean.
I did not. See, fun facts. This is a get to know each other a lot better episode.
I'm curious, Sarah Connor or Ripley? Like
She's like the 1B, I would say. But I think the name Ripley stands out a little more. Sarah Connor's actually, by design, I think even in the movie, just kind of a normal name.
Yeah.
Doesn't he off 3 or 4 of them before he gets to her?
Yeah.
Well, she's so badass, though.
She becomes one for sure. Yeah. That progression from movie 1 to movie 2 is insane.
Yeah. For me growing up, I was more Sarah Connor than Ripley. Like I think Alien came into my life a little bit later and I just looked at the movies very differently. But like Sarah Connor, like I wanted to be her. And I
would say the same thing.
Got the same outfit with the black shorts and the black tank top, the black hat. And
I did the aviators looking all like practicing, like, because I was a bit of a tomboy and you didn't have many like chicks who looked sexy and like tough at the same time. And so Linda Hamilton was just like, oh my God, I want to be you. She was epic in Terminator 2. It's like, wow, so good.
And thank you to George Miller for giving us Furiosa, who's one of the newer kind of ones in that lexicon now.
Exactly.
The rest of these questions will just be Australian based. What's your favorite Peter Weir movie? No, I'm kidding. That's not the question.
I was like,
hold on, I bet you have one. I'm sure you do.
I was thinking you might ask me that.
No, I'm not going to ask you what your favorite Peter Weir movie is. Every Man I Know is its Master Commander, but I can see that being a mostly dude movie. But the next.
I love Master and Commander, but I'd actually say he's got 2 that I really like. But I actually really like Witness, and I really like Picnic at Hanging Rock. But
he's good. I was not going to ask you that one. No, we'll have some Australian questions later, just because again, you're just like us, but so exotic to we Americans. The next question actually is, what would be your dream project to direct now that you are a director / producer / writer to bring to life? Is there like a story or a biopic or even a genre that you'd like to tackle?
Oh, definitely. I have a story that I started writing a script for that is horror sci-fi. And it's one that's set out in space. And I don't want to say too much because I really do want to make it at some point. And I stopped writing it at the time because I was like, this is going to be like minimum 30 million, minimum probably like 100 and whatever. I was, when you start getting into that mindset, you kind of go, oh, maybe I should try and be realistic here. So I kind of put it to the side, but more and more I'm feeling like it might be a possibility in the future. So, but if it wasn't something that I was creating and it was, say, like a franchise, I got to say I would actually love a crack at doing an Alien movie. I really would. I just would love to do something. I think Neil Blomkamp's stuff was like the concept work for that was so awesome that it got me thinking about different Alien movies. And it's not that I thought that Alien had run out of things to do, but I just was wondering by the time I could get there, whether they would have done everything, or maybe an Alien Predator movie. Alien Predator. We all like a bit of Predator.
I don't think they've gotten that right yet, but yeah, I could see a good one.
A really good one.
Yeah, it's funny you like read our mind or something, because our next question was going to be about like if there was an existing IP that you would like to take a crack at. So clearly it's Aliens, AVP, maybe,
or a Philip K. Dick. Novel.
Okay.
I would totally do it. Something new that isn't maybe a film yet, but based off like a book would be awesome. So yeah, anything, or Lovecraft. I love Lovecraft. Or Stephen King as well, I should probably say. I'm saying everybody now, but
he's running out of things to adapt. So many things are adapted. All his unfilmable things like Gerald's Game and stuff are now being adapted. So we'll see.
I know.
But no, that'd be cool for any of those. I think you'd be right at home though, yeah, with something in the Alien universe for sure.
Yeah.
You are a wonderful artist, be it drawing, painting, photography, design, as we've established here. Do you have a favorite artist or even like a work of art, like a painting or sculpture that you really love that really kind of speaks to you?
There are a few artists that I really like, but one of the artists that I do tend to reference a lot is I love Bill Henson's work. His photography is really evocative and haunting. And I love Francis Bacon's painting and German expressionist drawer, Kathy Kollwitz. She did lithographs as well, but her stuff is amazing. It's like she lost, I think, 2 children to the war, or maybe it was her child and her husband to the war. And so she did these series of charcoal drawings where, there's a skeleton reaching into somebody's body and pulling out their soul. And it's just, they're both beautiful and like really like so sad, but also really scary at the same time, because you can tell the mindset that she would have been in, during post-war, essentially in Germany, where they were still recovering. I mean, that would have been. That's why I like a lot of noir film too, because there's a lot of emotion in the dramatic lighting in film noir, and one of the reasons why I like Kathy Kollwitz is a lot of it's just black and white. It's very dramatic, stark stuff, but it hits home. So yeah.
I was just Google image searching because I was not familiar with her, and you're right, they are some incredible work. I'm going to peruse some more of that later, so thank you for sharing.
No worries.
So now we're going to get into some of the Australian questions that we promised. First one up, and you kind of referenced this earlier. What is the scariest animal from Australia to you?
To me, I mean, personally, I'm not super. Maybe crocodile. I know shark. What am I thinking? Shark is definitely scares. Oh yeah. Sorry. I realize now. It just flooded back to me. I've obviously blocked it out of my memory. But bizarrely enough, you'd think Jaws would be the movie that really scared me, and it did scare me a little. But I saw a James Bond film where, I don't know if you remember the James Bond film where where they're in a swimming pool and there's the contraptions and they lift up the contraptions. For ages, I would always wait until everybody got in the pool and I'd just watch. And if everybody was okay, then I'd get into the pool. Because I had this like in the back of my mind, even though I knew there was no sharks or shark doors, I kept thinking, what if there's a shark door in the pool?
Just waiting to make sure Donald Pleasance isn't like waiting outside. I think that was him in that version.
He's Blofeld in one of those. There's been sharks in I think 3 or 4 Bond movies now.
Yes.
Oh, there's some pretty awesome shark movies actually, and I know a couple of friends are working on some shark movies that sound really cool.
Paper Street Included, Requiem coming soon.
Yeah, I think we're due for another shark film, and I think there's probably about 3 that are in post production, no doubt. But yeah, sharks. Scary.
Yeah, there's plenty of right answers for that one. Do you have a favorite piece of slang or an insult or a swear word that Aussies have that maybe we don't or don't even know about here in the States?
Oh, I always go to the classic F-bomb, but I'm trying to think.
Well, we know that one.
I'm trying to think. Can I say it? I'm like, well, actually, a lot of the ones are because my parents were both British and I was born here. But
I'm sure you have a bunch of crossover from the Cockney and all that too. So.
Bollocks is definitely it's more British, but I definitely think a lot of Aussies use it as well. Like bollocks, that's a pretty good word to say.
Yeah, that's not as commonplace here. That works.
Or the dog's bollocks, they say. My mum hates it. She's like, don't say that.
All right. So do you know FMK game, F, Marry, Kill?
Oh, yes.
Are you familiar with that? Okay. So you need to do that with these 3 Australian acts.
Okay.
In Excess, The Church, Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds.
Oh, okay. So it's always hard between the Marry and the F. Well, can I say the F-bomb? I won't say it.
You could say either way.
That's hard. I think, I would totally. Oh, I think I would fuck In Excess, marry Nick Cave, and the church would get shot. Not that I don't like them, but it's hard. Somebody has to die.
Yep. You all have to make our tough decisions.
I did not see that question coming. Just putting it out there. I did not see you asking that.
Glad we could keep you on your toes.
Sorry, The Church. I like your bagpipes and your big hit though.
Yeah.
So in a music related thing, what would be your walk-up music? Like what's the entrance music you're coming out to a boxing match or a TED Talk or a wrestling match? What's your entry music?
Oh, that's so hard because it depends on my mood. But if it's like pump up.
Yeah, pump up. Let's go with the pump ups.
It's weird because now I'm only thinking of scores and I've got like Crimson Tides in my head, Hans Zimmer, like, I don't know why.
Movie.
That came into my head, maybe because we were talking about, and also because I was thinking of Denzel.
And that is a rap score, I agree.
But no, actual song, probably something funky, something that's probably still reminiscent to a film like, Stuck in the Middle with You from Reservoir Dogs. I love that movie.
Steelers Wheel.
Steelers Wheel's great. So good. Anything by I like all the classics like Humble Pie and I like Chicago and all those classic bands, real musicians. That sounds really mean to modern music.
No, I know what you mean. Like even people hear Chicago and they think of like the 80s output where it was just Peter Cetera ballading, but like their old stuff. They were a rock band with horns.
Actually, I
25
know
to
what
64 is like a great intro song.
Cream.
Logging onto that.
Cream would be it because I'm a big Cream fan. The White Room.
That's what first I was playing in my head when you said
with
Cream.
black curtains.
Yeah. It's just such a good song. Such a good song.
Awesome. All right. So let's say we're in Sydney for a day and we only have one day. Where are you going to take us to go to eat, to sightsee? What is, your ideal day or night on the town look like?
Oh, it depends what you like to eat, but I probably would say there's a really great Korean barbecue place in the city that like not many people know about. Or if they do, they don't tell other people. And I love that place. It's really affordable and the food's really, really great. So I probably would say, I probably would take you to one of the more secret beaches, the less touristy beaches, but one that's like a little bit more secret. It's really beautiful. I'd probably take you there and just chill, have a nice day with some beers, conversation, talk about movies. And then, when we're ready, when we're a bit sunned and we've had a drink or two, or if you're not out drinking coffee or two, hop in the car and just head on over across the bridge. Or actually, you'd probably jump on a train because you wouldn't want to park your car and just maybe walk around the opera house before taking you to some barbecue Korean. That's what I'd do.
Sign me up.
Yeah,
sounds great.
Good trip. And then finally, what's the one thing that you've not been able to do since the pandemic, the quarantine, the social distancing? Once that's all lifted, is there something you're just itching to do that you've not been able to do this past year?
Proper production. Like I've had a couple of days of filming here and there, but most of it's been development. So I'm absolutely itching to be like on a set again properly. Like I miss all my friends, and it's also, you get addicted to it. It's a drug. You want that hit of being on, there's a problem. There's something went wrong. Oh, I've got to solve it. It's so stressful, but exciting. So, probably that. Just really missing filming, which I think I'm probably one of the few Australians that probably hasn't jumped onto a big, a production. But that was because I thought I was filming, and so I was holding off, and so I miss that.
Yeah, it is a sickness. We've talked about that with plenty of filmmakers on this show.
Yeah.
Sickness of film. So that's the end of the Rapid Fire 15. You passed. The points don't matter, but you scored 100. Before we let you go, there's one last tale to tell, as Cameron alluded to when he hooked us up for the show with you. You are forever linked with Paper Street because of an incident that happened with a few members of our team at the Sitges International Film Festival in Spain about a year and a half ago. So we would love it, because I don't really know this story. I've heard bits. We'd like to hear your side of it. I believe it was you, like I should. Aaron, Cameron, and Scare Package star Jeremy King somehow narrowly escaping jail. Can you elaborate?
I feel like I should just have a truth in amongst a lie, and you've got to pick which is the truth. But look, I think Cameron would probably tell this story better than me. But to put it into context, I've been I had a late flight from Australia. It's 24 hours of flying. I didn't sleep that whole time because I couldn't sleep for some reason on that particular trip. And then when I arrived in Spain, I had to wait until the evening. And so by the time I got to the screening, I'd probably been awake for 2 days or something. And the first people I met, I could hear these American voices, and they're like, oh, look at the queues. And I was like, oh, where? Because, I was like, oh, it's the first screening that I was going to see, Slice of Life at Sitges. I was so excited. And I gradually worked out, oh, these are the guys I'm screening with. And so I don't remember how it happened, but somebody talked to me, and it might have been Jeremy. And we started talking about films, and we were getting excited, and they were explaining, how it all works, because they'd been there a day before or something. And once we got on stage, we did our little spiels. And when we got off, it was I was really tired, and the guys were so lovely. They were like, oh, look, why don't we drop you off to your hotel, because you look really tired. And as soon as we got in the car and went around a bend, there were all these flashing lights. And it was like a scene in a movie where you're like, oh, this is where we get pulled over by the cops and something really bad happens. And what was worse was the Spanish are really intense. I mean, it makes me sound like I've been arrested in multiple countries when I say this, but I've experienced cops in many countries for various reasons, off in the distance or maybe.
No judgment here. We get it.
Judgment, but Spanish are quite serious. And they had poker faces on, and I was like, are they joking? Are they really serious? Oh, he looks serious. Oh, he looks like he's going to kill you. And I have never seen Jeremy, I hadn't seen Jeremy much before. Obviously, it was the first time I'd met him. But when I'd met him, he was so smiley. But when I looked at his face, when the cop was talking to him, he looked really worried, he was shitting himself. It was quite funny. But in retrospect, it's funny. But at the time, we're all like, oh no. And he's like, can I have your passport? Oh, I don't have my passport. Well, where's your driver's license? And they didn't have their seatbelts on. I had mine on, but in some parts of Europe, you can get away with not having a seatbelt. But me being me, I was like, I'm not taking any chances. So I had mine on, and I was almost waiting for them to sort of look at me, but they just didn't look at me. It was really weird. They were just looking at the guys, and I was like, is it because of the seatbelts? But then I was like, maybe.
Never seen a human as big as Cameron, maybe?
Maybe I easily.
I don't mean that in like that way. I just mean he is a large boulder of flesh.
It could also be it's like, oh, she's the Aussie girl. We don't have to worry about the Aussies. I don't know. Who knows? But it was kind of scary because they made us wait and they kept walking back and forth and they were like, get their torches and start shining it through, but not saying anything. And like me and Cameron are like in the back looking at each other. And it got to that point where it's like, are they going to arrest Jeremy? Like for being the driver and like everybody not having their seatbelts on.
First of all, what is he doing driving? I would not have let that happen if I was there.
Well, he had his driver's license. I'm pretty sure he had his driver's license, but I don't think he had his passport. I think that's what it was.
Gotcha. Okay.
Everybody else had their passport. He was just caught off guard as well. And so in the end, everybody who didn't have a seatbelt on got a €90 fine. And I got off, I was like, holy crap. Like I was like, oh my God, Spain is so intense. Like I've just arrived and I was jet lagged and everything was amplified as well. But he made us wait for a long time. And he was like, I could arrest you. To Jeremy. He's like, I could take this further. I could give you an even bigger fine. And Jeremy's like, and then eventually they finally let us go. But it was that horror scene moment in a film where you're like, we're going to die. Like these cops are going to just like, because they were so serious. It felt like that scene in a movie where something bad was going to happen. But no, nothing ended up happening. They did let us off with a warning and then they dropped me off at the hotel and that was the story. But I'm sure Cameron could tell it better than me. But yeah.
No, that was pretty good because I didn't know all the details. I didn't know they actually got fined. That's pretty hilarious. But yeah. we've seen too many movies like Broke Down Palace and I forget the name of the male version of that had Joaquin Phoenix and Vince Vaughn.
Yeah.
That's where it goes in our heads is like, oh, you have a tiny bit of drugs, you're going to go in prison for 25 years here in this.
Yeah, exactly. I probably watched way too much, like caught abroad or something, or jailed abroad or something. Those docos that are terrifying. But also I've been to, not that I want to make it Bali sound bad, but I've been to Bali a couple of times too, and I know that when they pull over the drivers there, sometimes there's a bit of, here's some money, go away now, and so I just wasn't sure what Spain was like because it was my first time there. But yeah, that was my story.
I'm sorry that your introduction to us was rather harrowing outside of the screaming.
It brought you closer together, probably.
Yes, it did. We bonded. We were like, remember that time we nearly got, in prison? Because I swear, I really did think that at one point we might get arrested. Yeah. I mean, even with my seatbelt on, I was like, oh no, you're with these guys. I was like,
guilty by association.
Yeah, exactly.
It's three weirdos. Yeah, I got to give Jeremy a hard time for this because, of course, he'd buckle under pressure like that. Puts on the big face, but then, nope. No, I appreciate you filling us some of the details of that. I hope we can run into each other at a future festival now that starting to see some light at the end of the tunnel of this pandemic and vaccines and everything else we talked about.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm keen to see what the guys do next as well, because I've been, I really enjoyed Scare Package and The Pale Door, and I'm just so keen to see what they do next. And I'm sure they got a million things in the works. It sounds like Aaron's constantly filming at the moment.
There's a lot of irons in the fire right now for sure. We actually talked about some at the top of the program here, and but yeah, a lot of stuff we can't announce yet, unfortunately. But stay busy for sure.
You're like saying, I'll tell you my stuff I can't announce to keep from yours.
Is there somewhere people can find you online? You'd like to direct somebody to a website or social media?
Yeah, so
keep up with you?
Yeah, so I'll be updating my website to have some of my new projects on there in addition to the ones currently, but it's www.rachelwiggins.com with an E on the end of Rachel. And also my Instagram it's just Rachel Wiggins with no gaps. So yeah, on Instagram. So that's where I post I do a lot of my posting there, work and what's coming up. So stay tuned because there will be some announcements coming in the next couple of months, which I'm really excited about. So look forward to chatting again, I'm sure.
Awesome.
No, we'll be sure to link to that in the show notes at paperstreetpodcast.com for sure. And Rachel, we appreciate all the info, all the updates on you and Deadhouse Dark, which again, look for that April 29th on Shudder. And we'd see what you do next and stay out of jail, stay out of Spain, it sounds like.
Yeah.
Stay away from sharks.
Exactly. No, thank you so much for having me. It's been fun and also enlightening to get asked some questions, which I've never thought about. So that was an experience. Thank you for that.
Hopefully you can carry it on with you in the future. And if some random person asks you to rank your Tony Scott movies, you'll be ready. Thanks.
I feel like I need to set up a podcast and get you on and put you in the firing seat or the firing line.
The hot seat. Yep.
The hot seat.
It's not fair that we asked her about all the Australians. It'd be weird if she was like, hey, what's your favorite movie from Paul Rudd? Like, that's not fair because he's an American. But we do that too because she's Australian. We ask these random things.
I love those. I mean, I watch everything. I'm that crazy person that watches everything because I don't ever switch off, which is half of the reason why I didn't sleep last night, because I just was watching things.
No, understood. We'll let you get back to watching things. And again, thank you for the time, and check her out on Instagram, and we'll put more of her website and stuff in the show notes at paperstreetpodcast.com. Rachel, take care, and we will hopefully see you at a festival sooner than later.
You too, guys. Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.